Saturday morning. The auctioneer is barking, the crowd is dead silent, and the board says, "Passed in." Lachlan is cooked. Oliver and Mia are bleeding Australian dollars. Harper can't find a roof. Chloe is raiding her super, and the RBA still isn't done. In Australia, the housing market isn't part of the economy. The economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the housing market. Ignore that rule, and you get liquidated. Over the next 10 stories, you'll watch builders, landlords, renters, bankers, and workers lose absolutely everything. Lachlan reckoned he had Australia figured out. Fixed price contracts, endless demand, free money everywhere. The great Australian dream wasn't a dream to him. It was a business model. New ute, branded polo, display homes. Smug grin. He thought housing only moved one way. Up. And in AUD terms, that made him feel bloody immortal. So he loaded up. More sites, more staff, more promises. Every new subdivision looked like easy money. Every contract looked like locked-in profit. The banks were relaxed. The clients were euphoric. The whole market was running on cheap credit and national delusion. Lachlan didn't think he was surfing a bubble. He thought he was smarter than the bubble. Then the trap snapped shut. Not all at once. Worse than that. Slowly. Timber, steel, concrete, labor. Everything started climbing, while his contracts stayed dead flat. That was the joke. The numbers he'd sold as certainty were now a noose. Every house he built wasn't making money anymore. It was bleeding it. Every single week. Suppliers stopped talking like mates and started talking like creditors. Calls got shorter, emails got colder. Delivery dates slipped. Quotes expired in hours. Lachlan kept telling himself it had settled down. Just ride it out. But this wasn't a rough patch. This was the construction sector collapse grinding his business into powder. One delayed truck, one blown margin, one sleepless night at a time. And then the RBA started swinging. Rate hike, rate hike, rate hike. Suddenly, his clients weren't excited anymore. They were terrified. Finance approvals slowed, variations got challenged. Buyers snapped at every extra Australian dollar. The market mood changed from greed to survival. Lachlan wasn't building homes now. He was standing in the blast radius of a national cash flow crisis, dressed up as suburbia. Payroll hit. BAS hit. Fuel hit. Insurance hit. Subbies wanted money. Suppliers wanted money. The ATO wanted money. Lachlan kept juggling, bluffing, stretching 7 days of cash into 30. That's how men like him go under in Australia. They don't explode in one big scene. They rot in private. Until one Monday morning, the account just says, "No." Insert mid-roll. Add here. Once the rumor got out, it was over. Workers stopped showing. Suppliers froze deliveries. Clients turned savage. Lawyers appeared. The company that had looked solid from the street was suddenly revealed for what it was. A shell held together by confidence and debt. Then came the word every builder fears in this country: liquidation. Cold, final, public, humiliating. And because Australia ties personal pride to property, the business collapse didn't stay in the business. It crawled into his house, into his marriage, into dinner, into sleep. The company bled out first, then Lachlan did. Personal guarantees, debts, asset sales. Bankruptcy wasn't some abstract legal event. It was the system walking into his lounge room and taking the future. The real brutality wasn't the paperwork. It was the silence after it. No workers calling. No clients calling. No momentum. Just shame. A bloke who built houses for a living now couldn't hold together his own life. And out on those unfinished slabs, Oliver and Mia were still paying mortgages on dirt, concrete, and a fantasy Lachlan had sold them as certainty. That's the lie at the heart of Australia. Housing doesn't just build wealth here. It decides who gets spared and who gets butchered. Lachlan thought he was selling the dream. He was really feeding the machine. And the next people it chews through, a nice ordinary mom and dad investor couple staring at 2 half-built properties and a mortgage cliff with their names on it. Oliver and Mia weren't reckless by Australian standards. That's the sick part. They were normal, respectable. The kind of couple everyone praises. Work hard, borrow hard, buy property, repeat. They'd been fed the same line for years. Property doubles every 10 years, mate. So they levered the family home, called it strategy, and stepped straight into the trap dressed as financial intelligence. 1 became 2. 2 felt like 4. Their broker called it building a portfolio. Their mates called it getting ahead. The tax deductions looked clever. Negative gearing looked sophisticated. Pandemic fixed rates made it all feel painless. Cheap money can make average decisions look like genius. In Australia, that delusion isn't fringe. It's practically a national religion with a mortgage attached. Then Lachlan went under, and the fantasy turned physical. 2 slabs, half a frame, no roof, no rent, no finished asset, just debt. That's the horror of the Australian housing machine. Your investment can become a paddock full of invoices and rebar, and the bank still treats it like a sacred obligation. They didn't own wealth, they owned a stalled construction wound. And right on cue, the cheap fixed rates expired. The mortgage cliff. Australia's favorite little debt bomb. 1 month the repayments were manageable. Next month they were savage. Same loans, same houses, same exhausted couple. Different reality. The RBA had changed the climate, and now the monthly repayment looked like punishment. Negative gearing wasn't saving them anymore. It was drowning them in cash flow pain. They tried all the respectable middle-class tricks. Cut spending, skip holidays, sell the second car, push through. But that only works when your losses are cosmetic. These weren't cosmetic. These were structural. Every week, more Australian dollars out. No finished homes, no rent to offset it. No miracle buyer, no rescue. Just the steady humiliation of discovering your wealth strategy is a machine for burning family cash. Then panic turned them cruel. Harper, their tenant, stopped being a person in their minds and became a line item. Raise the rent, recover the losses. Save the portfolio. That's how housing corruption spreads in Australia. It starts with a slogan about wealth creation and ends with one frightened family squeezing another for air. The smart investor mask fell off, and desperation took over. To insert mid-roll ad here. Eventually, they tried the obvious escape, sell. But Saturday morning had changed. The auctioneer called. Nobody moved. The crowd wasn't seeing a future gain anymore. They were seeing risk, dead cash flow, half-built exposure, toxic debt. The property was passed in. Just like that. Their exit door didn't open, because in a frozen market there is no exit. There is only inventory nobody wants. That's when the bank stopped being patient and started being exact. Default notice. Cold words. Legal tone. No sympathy. No cultural myth. No property always wins. Just formal recognition that the numbers had failed. Oliver and Mia had worshipped leverage like faithful Australians. Now the institution that sold them the ladder was calmly preparing to kick it away. That's how systemic betrayal sounds. Quiet, polite, and devastating. Before the formal collapse comes the Australian social death. You stop answering messages. Stop turning up. Stop talking. You can feel the judgment crawling over your skin. Because around here, losing property doesn't just mean losing money. It means losing status, respect, identity. And as they unraveled behind closed doors, Harper was now the one left scrambling in the savage machinery of the rent-bidding wars. That's what makes the Australian housing myth so vicious. It doesn't end at the investor. It drips downhill. Oliver and Mia got crushed by Lachlan's collapse. And then they passed the pain on to Harper. Same machine, same logic, different victim. Because the next battlefield isn't a mortgage ledger, it's a rental inspection line where good income, hard work, and common sense mean absolutely nothing. Harper did what the system told her. Study hard, work hard, earn well, keep your nose clean. She was a mining engineer on decent money, the exact sort of person this country pretends it rewards. But when housing becomes the real economy, discipline stops mattering. A strong salary doesn't buy security anymore. It just qualifies you to suffer slightly later than everybody else. Oliver and Mia's email arrived like a legal mugging. Rent increase, sharp, immediate, cold. Harper read it 3 times, not because she didn't understand it, but because she did. Their failed investment strategy had just entered her bloodstream. That's the Australian trick. Someone else's leverage mistake turns into your housing emergency. And now, her tidy life was being repriced by panic from people above her. Then came the ritual humiliation. Rental inspections. 20 people. 30 people. 40 people. All dressed like stable adults, trying not to look desperate. Harper stood in those queues with engineers, nurses, couples, students, and broken families. All pretending this was normal. In a sane economy, a full-time professional doesn't fight for shelter like it's a concert ticket. In Australia, that's just Tuesday. Then dignity went out the window. Blind offers. 50 over. 100 over. 200 over. The rent bidding wars. That's what happens when a housing shortage meets national cowardice. Harper wasn't shopping anymore. She was auctioning pieces of her future just to sleep indoors. And every extra Australian dollar she offered wasn't a choice. It was proof the market had stopped treating workers like humans. Every rejection pushed the map wider. Further out. Longer trains. Longer drives. Less sleep. More cost. That's the hidden tax of Australia's housing sickness. You don't just pay in rent, you pay in time, exhaustion, and the slow erosion of your will. Harper could still do the maths, but now the maths was doing something back. It was taking chunks out of her life. Then came the truly corrosive part. She still had a good job, and she still felt broke. Groceries trimmed, coffee gone, nights out dead, emergency savings dissolving, just to keep a roof overhead. That's how a housing crisis mutates into an economic one. Harper stopped spending everywhere else. Not because she wanted to, because the rent had declared war on every other part of her life. Insert mid, roll it here. Eventually, she got a place. Worse, smaller, dearer. That's the Australian victory condition now. Not thriving. Not building. Just not sleeping in your car. Harper wasn't homeless on paper, but the system had still taken something massive from her. Stability, hope, belief. She'd done everything right and ended up bargaining against strangers for basic shelter. That's not a glitch. That's policy by other means. And when your housing cost starts eating your identity, the outside world gets starved. No brunch, no cafe tabs, no impulsive little treats that keep city life alive. Harper pulled back from everything non-essential. To her, it was survival. To a small business owner watching receipts collapse, it was another crack in the wall. The next victim in the chain wasn't a banker. It was Chloe. This is the middle-class betrayal nobody wants to say aloud. Australia tells workers to become useful, skilled, disciplined, productive. Harper did all of it. And still, housing reached into her pocket and made a joke out of her effort. That's what happens when the market isn't part of the economy. It's the landlord of the economy. And the rent is always due. Harper didn't crash because she was stupid. She crashed because someone else's property dream needed cash. And the system decided she'd supply it. That's how wide the blast radius gets. One failed investor couple, one rate shock, one panicked rent hike. And now a Melbourne cafe is about to get strangled by empty tables, dying foot traffic, and a woman named Chloe refusing to look poor. Chloe sold atmosphere for a living. Melbourne polish, good beans, good taste, good lighting. From the street, it looked like she'd made it. But underneath the styling sat the most Australian fear of all, status anxiety. She couldn't bear looking like she'd slipped. So even as the numbers softened, she kept the veneer immaculate. That's how the middle class decays here. Beautifully. Then the room started sounding wrong. Less chatter, fewer taps, empty chairs at lunch. Those little consumer habits people dismiss as trivial, they're the bloodstream of a city. Harper skipping one coffee didn't kill Chloe. Thousands of Harpers, all squeezed by rent and rates, absolutely did. This is what happens when housing eats household cash flow. The small businesses down the road start suffocating in public. Revenue didn't just dip, it got smashed. Down 70%. That's the sort of number that turns a business from identity into emergency. But Chloe kept pretending. Fresh pastries, full roster, social posts, smiles. Because once you admit the shop is bleeding, you have to admit you are too. And she'd rather burn through pride, sleep, and savings than look defeated in front of the suburb. Then the commercial lease started cutting deeper. Rent doesn't care if your customers are broke, power bills don't care, suppliers don't care. That's the cruelty of Australia's property-first model. Residential pain becomes commercial pain. The whole country behaves like one giant landlord economy where everyone below the asset layer gets milked. Chloe wasn't losing a café. She was being harvested by the same machine. She started doing what distressed Australians do best, performing prosperity while hollowing out from the inside. Nice clothes, good front, calm voice, internal ruin. Because the fear wasn't just insolvency, it was humiliation. Looking like she'd failed. In a culture obsessed with property, image becomes collateral. Chloe wasn't only paying rent on the cafe. She was paying emotional rent on a status she could no longer afford. Then she crossed the line. Respectable people pretend they never cross. The superannuation raid. Tapping mandatory retirement money under financial hardship just to keep the cafe alive. Think about how obscene that is. The future gets looted to keep the present from looking broken. That's Australia's housing spillover in one perfect image. Property pressure so vicious, it forces people to cannibalize tomorrow. Insert mid-roll ad here. After that, the room itself changed. Staff hours cut. Lights off early, fridges half empty. The cafe still existed, technically, but the life had leaked out of it. Chloe started calling Ethan to juggle ATO obligations and BAS deadlines, hoping good paperwork might buy a little time. That's another Australian fantasy, that proper forms can save you once the macro tide has decided otherwise. Now every knock at the door sounded loaded. Landlord, supplier, creditor. The threat wasn't cinematic, it was administrative, practical, civilized. That's what makes it brutal. Australian collapse often arrives wearing neat paperwork and polite language. Chloe wasn't waiting for a dramatic explosion. She was waiting for a cold email, a legal step, a lock change, and the realization she'd rated her super for nothing. That's the real cost of Chloe's collapse. Not just a failed cafe, a stolen future. Retirement funds torched. Years of work rerouted into rent, rates, and financial triage. She'd sacrifice tomorrow to impress today. And the system still didn't care. Ethan, the tax accountant she'd leaned on, could see the pattern now. His investor clients were cracking, his business clients were cracking, and the ATO was circling. Housing crises don't just flatten borrowers, they flatten the little urban ecosystems around them. Chloe's cafe died because renters got squeezed, investors panicked, and every spare dollar got sacrificed to shelter. That's the chain. That's the subsidiary economy. And next in line is Ethan, a bloke who thought he understood the tax game better than the system, right up until the ATO sent him the letter. Ethan loved the architecture of the loophole. Negative gearing, depreciation schedules, offsets, timing. He wasn't just an accountant, he was a translator for the national property religion. He made ordinary investors feel sophisticated. He could turn losses into strategy, debt into tax theater, and fragile portfolios into something that looked intelligent on paper. That's the danger of cleverness in Australia. It starts sounding like immunity. Blokes like Ethan thrive when the mania feels normal. Mum and dad investors everywhere. Refi after refi. Fresh purchase. New depreciation claim. Bigger portfolio. Better refund. Oliver and Mia were never just clients. They were part of a conveyor belt. The whole office ran on the assumption that housing would keep rising and the tax code would keep blessing the gamble. Then the macro weather flipped. Hard. At first, the cracks arrived as tone changes. Clients less chirpy, more urgent, more defensive. Lachlan's collapse had already infected the numbers. Oliver and Mia weren't asking about growth anymore. They were asking about survival. Chloe wasn't asking about optimization anymore. She was asking about hardship. That's when Ethan started to understand the nasty truth. Tax strategy only feels smart while the cash flow is still breathing. Then the ATO entered the story. Data matching, investment audits, questions about claims, questions about structures, questions about reality. The office air changed instantly. Ethan had spent years helping people dance on the edge of the rules. Now the rules were leaning back. That's the thing about institutions like the ATO. They let you feel clever for years, then remind you who's actually got the longer memory. And here's the irony. Ethan had built his own portfolio on the same logic. He wasn't above the machine. He was inside it. Property exposure, leverage, assumptions. He'd mistaken professional fluency for invulnerability. That's a very Australian way to die financially. You explain the game so well, you forget you're just another player. And once the market turns, expertise doesn't save you. It just makes the shame more articulate. When the audit letter landed, it didn't feel administrative. It felt surgical. Because this wasn't just about clients anymore. It was about his own assumptions, his own structures, his own overconfidence. Ethan had underestimated how brutal the macro can get once the property cycle starts coughing blood. The ATO wasn't the cause of the collapse. It was just the cleanup crew arriving after the party turned toxic. Insert mid-roll ad here. Then the secondary hit arrived. Distressed clients stopped paying professionals. Investors in panic don't care about polished tax structures. They care about triage. So his revenue started going soft exactly when his own exposure was getting harder. That's how the machine corners you. Your income source decays at the same speed as your liabilities intensify. In Australia, property pain has a way of multiplying through every ledger it touches. Once the banks see weakness, the tone changes. Friendly turns forensic. Review turns pressure. Suddenly, Ethan was on the wrong side of the desk, feeling the same institutional stare he'd watched clients endure. That's systemic betrayal in its purest form. The structures you helped optimize are now the ones evaluating whether you're worth squeezing. And Jack, the real estate bloke, who once moved Lachlan's land like hot stock, was about to find out too. It's one thing to go broke in private. It's another to watch your own discipline betray you. Ethan knew the terminology. He knew the rules. He knew exactly how bad the shape was. That made it worse. Because every number confirmed the same fact. His portfolio wasn't a fortress. It was a cardboard facade propped up by a housing market he'd confused with permanent law. Ethan sold tax efficiency, like salvation. But the tax code can't save a culture built on debt, denial, and the myth that housing always bails you out. Now he's just another bloke getting audited by reality. And the next face in the chain? Jack. Flash suit. Polished grin. Real estate swagger. A man who once sold Lachlan's land in 10 minutes, and now can't drag a single bidder through the door. Jack was made for boom time Australia. Tight suit, sharp teeth, fast patter. He didn't sell houses. He sold FOMO. Sold urgency. Sold envy. Sold the idea that if you weren't bidding today, you were a mug. And when the market was euphoric, blokes like Jack looked like prophets. That's what mania does. It takes a salesman standing in cheap credit and turns him into a temporary genius. Saturday mornings were theater. Auctioneer yelling. Crowds packed tight. Fear in the air. Jack fed on it. Each overbid validated the national story. That Australian property was invincible, and anyone doubting it was just poor or late. He moved blocks. He moved dreams. He moved nonsense. Because in a rising market, speed and confidence can disguise almost any stupidity. Right up until the climate changes. Then the RBA tightened the screws and the crowd vanished. Not thinned out, vanished. Finance got harder, fear got louder. Buyers started sitting on their hands. Jack kept his tone upbeat because that's the job. But he could feel it. The machine had changed gears. The market wasn't hot anymore. It was suspicious, defensive, frozen. And salesmanship is nearly worthless when money itself stops moving. This is where the Australian property fantasy gets ugly. An empty open house inspection. No footsteps, no small talk, no nosy neighbors. Just polished floors, stale air, and a bloke in a suit waiting for ghosts. Jack had built his identity around momentum. Now he was trapped in stillness. The room itself was telling him the truth. This wasn't a dream asset anymore. It was a toxic one. Listings started piling up. Stale campaigns. Vendor panic. Price guide cuts. Awkward calls. Every property he couldn't move became another little indictment of the market he'd worshipped. That's the hidden violence of downturns. Boom time operators are suddenly forced to stare at inventory. Not aspiration. Jack wasn't shifting lifestyle anymore. He was babysitting unwanted debt with polished shoes and a branded signboard. Then came the inspection that broke him. Fresh shirt, fresh brochure stack, perfect kitchen scent. 0 attendees. That's when the panic turned physical. Tight chest, dry mouth. The room suddenly too large. Because an empty open house isn't just bad for business, it's a revelation. It tells you the whole auction economy was built on cheap money, fake urgency, and a crowd that no longer exists. Insert mid-roll it here. When volume dies, agents don't just lose face. They lose oxygen. No sales means no commission. No commission means the suit, the lease, the office split, the image, all of it starts turning predatory. Jack had spent years monetizing other people's FOMO. Now he was trapped in his own cash flow trap. The Australian housing machine had promoted him in the boom and abandoned him in the freeze, passed in. It's such a polite phrase for such a savage event. It means the market has looked at your asset and declined the performance. Jack saw it over and over. Properties once fought over now sitting there like accusations. And somewhere inside the banking system, Noah, the risk bloke who'd greenlit this credit binge, was starting to feel the rot too. Because bad loans always come home. Jack's crisis wasn't spectacular. It was repetitive. One dead inspection, one missed deal, one angry vendor, one fresh RBA headline. That kind of collapse is psychologically filthy because there's no clean moment to point at. Just the slow understanding that the thing you were best at only worked when the machine was irrational. Turns out he wasn't a genius. He was a boom time accessory. Australia's property market doesn't just mint winners. It manufactures temporary roles for temporary conditions. Jack looked powerful while credit was cheap. That's all. Now the ledger's rolling upward to the banking floor, where Noah is staring at delinquency reports from the very loans he once waved through. Same suburb, same mania, same debt, bigger office, bigger fall. Noah sat above the suburbs in a glass tower and called it risk management. Spreadsheets, serviceability models, approval bands, committee language. He thought distance meant objectivity. But when the machine's profitable, risk people don't stop the party. They formalize it, they bless it, they package danger in respectable acronyms and call it growth. That's how credit bubbles get tailored suits and internal memos. Short-term profit makes everyone in banking a little bit stupid. Jack brought demand, brokers brought volume. The books looked healthy. The margins looked attractive. And Noah let himself believe the language of the boom, that Australian housing debt was safe because Australians would crawl over broken glass before missing a mortgage payment. That wasn't prudence. That was cultural mythology, dressed as credit policy. Bad debt rarely announces itself with a bang. It drips in, missed payments, extensions, hardship requests, a few strange pockets in the outer suburbs, then more, then more. Jack's clients, Oliver and Mia types. People who looked fine at approval time, but needed cheap money to stay upright. Now the RBA had changed the maths, and the maths was coming back up the pipeline with teeth. Then the question started inside the bank. Why were serviceability assumptions so loose? Why were certain books deteriorating faster? Why did risk let this through? That's when corporate loyalty evaporates. In the boom, you're strategic. In the squeeze, you're exposed. Noah had helped manufacture a mountain of leveraged optimism. Now he was being asked to explain why gravity still worked. And because nobody in a property bubble stays clean, Noah had his own side bet running. Margin exposure to listed real estate plays, all funded by the same smug belief that property weakness would be temporary. That's the toxic genius of the housing machine. It makes every role in the ecosystem echo the same arrogance. Builder, agent, investor, banker, different language, same delusion. Then the collapse turned intimate. Margin pressure, employment fear, lender review. And finally, that one cold phrase he'd watched pass through the system for other people. Default notice. On his own place. On his own life. That's the moral punchline of every debt bubble. The people who author the risk can still get flattened by it. Noah wasn't above the system. He was merely higher up the food chain. Insert mid-roll at here. Once the institution smells weakness, it starts planning around your absence. Performance management. Quiet distancing, succession chatter. Noah could feel it in every meeting. The bank didn't need him loyal. It needed him absorbent. Someone to hold the mess while they reframe the narrative. That's what big systems do best. Privatize the shame, socialize the blame, and keep the logo clean. In panic, banks tighten everything. Working capital, supplier lines, trade finance. Every tap gets twisted shut. That's where Noah's pain stopped being personal again and became contagious. Lucas, a materials supplier already gasping from Lachlan's unpaid invoices, suddenly found his credit line squeezed by the same banking fear Noah helped create. One institution, one policy shift, thousands of collateral victims. It's one thing to send pain outward. It's another to imagine your own driveway, your own front door, your own life entering the repossession process. Noah had spent years reducing human fragility to probabilities. Now he was staring at his own fragility in legal font. That's the black comedy of high finance in a housing-addicted country. The abstraction always ends up in somebody's lounge room. Noah called it risk. The market called it free money. The RBA called it inflation control. But the result was always the same. Regular lives fed into a housing machine until even the executives got chewed. And now the chain runs to Lucas, the supplier left choking on millions in unpaid materials and a credit line the bank no longer trusts. That's where theory becomes warehouse silence. Lucas had seen enough booms to think he understood this one. Demand looked endless. Estates were spreading. Builders were hungry. So he expanded. More stock, more warehousing, more trade terms, more faith. That's the oldest trap in a housing surge. You stop asking whether demand is healthy and start asking how fast you can service it. Momentum becomes your business plan. Credit becomes your bloodstream. Builders like Lachlan weren't just customers. They were moving parts in Lucas's cash cycle. Give them terms, keep the sites moving, get paid later. That's how the sector runs when confidence is thick. But trade credit is just delayed vulnerability in a high-vis vest. The moment the builders wobble, the supplier books start rotting from the inside, and the whole warehouse becomes a monument to optimism. Nobody settled. Then Lachlan was gone. Liquidated. Just like that. And Lucas was staring at millions in unpaid materials, each pallet now transformed into dead money. That's the cruelty of sector collapse. Your product already left. Your cost already hit. Your debtor already died. All that's left is paperwork, telling you the gap between what you're owed and what you'll recover is big enough to swallow a lifetime. Then Noah's Bank did what banks always do when fear arrives. Protect itself. Review the facility. Tighten the covenants. Ask harder questions. Reduce the oxygen. Lucas didn't need a lecture about prudence. He needed working capital. But in a downturn, institutions don't back your resilience. They test your weakness. And with the credit line squeezed, every slow-paying customer suddenly became a direct threat to survival. Then came the real terror. The moment he realized the company's debt sheet had outrun what he could ever earn again. That's the point of no return. The number becomes too big to emotionally process. It stops feeling like business and starts feeling geological. Lucas wasn't asking how to win anymore. He was asking how much of the wreckage he could stop from landing on his family and staff. Once you're there, your brain changes. Stock becomes cash. Vehicles become cash. Racks become cash. Pride becomes negotiable. Lucas moved from expansion thinking to salvage thinking in the space of weeks. That's what the RBA shock and construction collapse do together. They take a man who spent decades building a supply chain and force him to liquidate it like a deceased estate nobody really wants. Insert mid-roll ad here. Staff always feel it before the owner says it. The quieter forklifts. The shorter days. The bad eye contact. Lucas had to start cutting people, and every cut made the place feel less like a business and more like an aftermath. That's the hidden brutality of supplier collapse. It doesn't just hit balance sheets. It wipes wages, routines, marriages, apprenticeships, whole little human systems tied to one industrial shed. The worst image wasn't dramatic at all. It was stillness. Dust settling on stock that should have moved. Trucks parked. Phones not ringing. In a boom, movement hides fragility. In a bust, stillness reveals it. Lucas could now see the whole architecture clearly. Cheap money had built demand, builders had borrowed against it, banks had amplified it, and suppliers like him had trusted the motion. Fatal mistake. And here's how wide the blast radius gets. Young contractors, creatives, part-time staff, people at the edge of the machine, all start missing wages when a supplier like Lucas goes into distress. Ava, a junior interior designer working on his projects, was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Property isn't stable employment in Australia. It's a relay race of unpaid promises waiting for the baton to drop. Lucas didn't get destroyed because he was lazy or careless. He got destroyed because he built capacity for a housing regime that needed endless momentum to look sane. Once the momentum died, so did the illusion. And out on the edge of that industrial silence, Ava, the young woman who trusted property work as a career path, is about to discover that even wages aren't sacred when the machine runs dry. Sophia believed in the respectable machinery. Superannuation, long-term capital, risk controls, patient money. It all sounded cleaner than property mania, and that's why it hurt more when the cracks appeared. She was a junior manager, not a shark. Just another intelligent worker trusting the official architecture. But in Australia, even the safe pools of money are downstream from household panic if enough people start raiding the future to survive the present. Then the hardship withdrawals accelerated. Chloe types, Lucas's laid-off staff. People crushed by rent, debt, and vanishing hours. The requests weren't abstract anymore. They came in waves. That's what makes this chain so filthy. Housing pressure doesn't stay in housing. It leaks into retirement systems, investment flows, and employment stability. Sophia was watching household desperation turn into institutional liquidity stress in real time. Super funds are supposed to think in decades, But panic drags everyone into the week. What can be sold? What has to wait? What gets marked down? Sophia could feel the institutional anxiety thickening, not because the world was ending, but because timing was. Money wanted out faster than the structure liked. That's when calm systems stop acting calm and start devouring junior staff first. She hadn't violated the proverb out of greed. That's what makes her story colder. Sophia was an outer ring victim, a worker inside the supposedly sober layer of the system. But when the property economy dominates the real one, there is no clean outside. Rent stress, super raids, redemptions, layoffs, they all connect. She was about to be punished for a collapse she didn't help create, only managed around. The whispers started the same way they always do. Efficiency review, cost discipline, rationalization. Language designed to bleach the blood out of layoffs. Sophia could read the subtext. The fund needed to look controlled, while its stress spread underneath. Junior staff would be easiest to cut, easiest to explain, easiest to forget. That's the Wall Street cruelty imported into Australian respectability. Panic first, compassion never. Then, it happened fast. Meeting invite. Small room. Polite tone, immediate termination. That's the modern financial kill shot. No raised voices, no drama. Just institutional efficiency severing your income stream in under 15 minutes. Sophia walked in as a fund manager and walked out as another rentier with no margin, no protection, and no leverage over the machinery that had just flattened her. Insert mid-roll at here. Losing a finance job is one thing. Losing it inside a housing crisis is something nastier. Because the first question isn't career-related, it's primal. How long can I keep the rent covered? Sophia now understood Harper's world from the wrong side. That's how broad the machine gets. It doesn't care whether you poured coffee, managed risk, or ran fund liquidity. It reduces everybody to housing vulnerability eventually. This is the poison nobody wants to admit. Australia's retirement system can be shaken by the same household distress created by its housing obsession. The safe pool isn't separate from the panic pool, it's fed by it. Sophia learned that the hard way. And while she scrambled for rent, Ava, a younger worker at the far edge of the property machine, was about to discover that unpaid wages and rate shocks can wipe out a career before it even begins. Financial systems are brilliant at one thing, making you feel secure right before they reclassify you as expendable. Sophia had trusted the grammar of stability. Super, compliance, long horizons, prudence. But once the withdrawal tide hit and the fund needed a cleaner story, she became excess weight. That's the middle-class death sentence in one line. You were respectable, until the cost model said otherwise. Sophia's story proves the radius of this thing. You don't have to flip houses, sell auctions, or game negative gearing to get crushed by a housing-first economy. You just have to live inside it. And next comes Ava, 25. Early in her career, still naive enough to believe property work was a safe ladder. Right before Lucas's unpaid wages and another RBA jolt ripped the rungs out. Ava picked property because it looked safe. Design the spaces. Style the dream. Build a career around the biggest obsession in the country. On paper, it made sense. Housing looked permanent. Demand looked cultural. The industry looked respectable. That's how the Australian machine lures young workers in. It hides the grinder behind mood boards, clean renders, and the fantasy that shelter-related work must be future-proof. Lucas's company gave her projects, payments, rhythm, enough to imagine a path, enough to start planning a life. In early career, cash flow isn't just money, it's identity. It tells you you're real, employable, progressing. But she was standing on the edge of a chain reaction she couldn't see. Supplier distress. Builder collapse. Bank tightening. None of it looked like her problem. Until the invoice stopped clearing. At first she told herself it was admin. End of month lag. Minor issue. That's how collapse sneaks up on younger workers. You don't think the sector is dying. You think accounts must be delayed. But as the days dragged, the truth got uglier. Lucas wasn't late. He was gasping. And Ava's wages were now just another casualty floating in a property ecosystem with no obligation to protect the small fish. And just to make it nastier, the RBA kept rates high enough to crush every other cost around her. Rent, groceries, utilities, sharehouse tensions. That's the full system kill shot. Young workers don't just lose income. They lose income inside an expensive, unforgiving environment where every missing Australian dollar matters immediately. Ava wasn't being eased into hardship. She was being body slammed into it by timing and macro violence. When you're 25, money and self-worth are welded together. So the unpaid wages didn't just threaten Ava's rent, they attacked her idea of adulthood. Had she picked the wrong field? Was property actually a trap disguised as ambition? That's the cruelty of entering the labor market in a housing-obsessed country. You're told to choose stable sectors, and the stable sector turns out to be the grinder itself. Then the account hit that horrible young adult threshold. Too little to pretend with, too much shame to tell people. She started rationing everything: meals, train trips, calls, heat. That's what national property sickness does at the tail end of the chain. It strips the outer ring first. No assets, no cushion, no parent-sized portfolio. Just a worker who trusted a sector and got fed into the gears. Insert mid-roll ad here. Ava hadn't gamed negative gearing, hadn't over-leveraged a portfolio, hadn't sold dodgy loans. She still got smashed. That's the final proof of the proverb. In Australia, once housing takes over the economy, even innocent career choices get repriced by rate hikes, debt chains, and institutional indifference. The system doesn't need your consent to beat you. It only needs your participation. There's a special violence in being wiped out before you've even built a life. Older victims lose assets. Ava was losing possibility. The confidence to keep going. The belief that effort compounds. That's why the young get so dangerous to the myth. They expose it early. Property isn't a safe ladder in Australia. It's a hierarchy of protected insiders standing on a trapdoor over everyone else. By the time the chain reached Ava, there were no glamorous words left. No yield, no growth, no strategy. Just human cost. A builder gone. Investors cooked. A renter displaced. A café raided. An accountant audited. An agent shamed.